We think it's highly likely that he is looking to invade Ukraine. That is why we're doing all we can through deterrence and diplomacy to urge him to desist. That's why we are strengthening our sanctions regime here in the United Kingdom. We're going to be introducing new legislation so that we can hit targets, including those who are key to the Kremlin's continuation and the continuation of the Russian regime. We're also supplying and offering extra support into our Baltic allies across the Black Sea, as well as supplying the Ukrainians with defensive weapons. And the United Kingdom is the largest contributor to NATO in Europe, and we are the largest European NATO supporter of troops and defences in Europe.
I want to talk to you about sanctions in a moment, but just in terms of what could happen, are you thinking an invasion is imminent?
Well, what we are seeing is attempts by the Russian regime to destabilise Ukrainian democracy. Last week we revealed intelligence that showed an attempt by the Kremlin to install a puppet regime in Kiev. We've seen cyber attacks. We've seen other attempts to destabilise Ukraine. At the same time, we've seen this big build-up on the border. There is a real threat of invasion, but we don't know what's going to happen. No one can predict the future. What we have to do is work as hard as we can to stop that happening, because it would be terrible for Europe. It would be terrible for freedom and democracy. And I think it would be very bad for the Russian government themselves, because it could well end up as a quagmire, as we saw in Chechnya, as we saw in Afghanistan. The Ukrainians will fight. That is absolutely clear. So we are doing all we can to prevent that happening.
Could we see British soldiers on the ground? Is that something that you rule out, or is it a possibility?
That's very unlikely.
But it's not something you rule out.
We don't. It's very unlikely, and the Defence Secretary is being clear about that. But what we are doing is we're training up Ukrainian soldiers. So we've trained up 20,000 troops in Ukraine. We've supplied anti-tank missiles, defensive weapons. We're giving support to the Ukrainian Navy. We're giving support to the Ukrainian energy sector to help them become more energy independent. So we really are giving every possible support we can to Ukraine. And we are one of the leading donors of lethal aid to Ukraine to make sure that they are in the best possible position to defend themselves against Russia. But Ukraine is very different from the status of the Baltic countries like Estonia, who are members of NATO, and we have a security guarantee with. And that's why we're doubling. We're offering to double the number of troops into Estonia, where we have the enhanced forward presence, to make sure that we are bolstering support for those crucial NATO allies who are very close to Russia.
But what people want to know is there any scenario in which British soldiers are fighting with Ukrainians they've been training? Is there any scenario in which they're fighting with Ukrainians against the Russian soldiers?
That is very unlikely. This is about making sure that the Ukrainian forces have all the support we can give them, whether it's intelligence support, whether it's cyber support, whether it's defensive weapons, which we have been supplying into Ukraine.